Well, Heidi hi, Heidi ho. How you doing? Tim Warner here, and I'm going to teach you about a subject that I think is particularly important in GitHub Copilot in VS Code, and that is workspace indexing. Here we are in VS Code. I've got the GitHub Copilot chat extension installed. I've signed in with my GitHub account. I have a license, so I'm ready to use the tool. Now, I've got my codebase here, and how is a codebase or workspace defined? Well, in VS Code, you've got the workspace file that shows any folders that you've added into your base, and then you've got workspace scope settings, but that's not actually what we're talking about here. Basically, your workspace root from GitHub Copilot's perspective is your project root folder. When you open a folder, that's the root, and then there's rules on how many files can be added to the index. I'll link you to the docs, but basically at the end of the day, it comes down to your chat, whether you're going to use one of the chat variables. You might be familiar with codebase, and then you've also got @workspace. What's the difference between those? Here's the situation. @codebase is a chat variable that comes as part of the GitHub Copilot chat extension, and that is a context identifier that tells GitHub Copilot to take into account all of your codebase, in other words, the root of your project. Now, what's cool is, as long as GitHub Copilot has indexed your codebase, it doesn't matter whether you're local only or whether you've already pushed to GitHub. As long as you've got your GitHub Copilot license, you're good to go. How do you know whether the workspace or the codebase has been indexed? I'm going to get to that in just a second. So basically, you use #codebase when you want to make sure that your entire codebase is incorporated. What is my test coverage in this codebase? I might use pound for that. Now, @workspace, what you're doing there is participating with a chat participant. This is an actual LLM hosted by GitHub. Again, the chat participant is contributed by the Copilot chat extension, and it's available. It knows what your index is, so it can chat about your codebase, but it also has an additional LLM, large language model reasoning layer on top of it, so it's more robust. You'll want to do @workspace when you're talking about your code and you want the additional intelligence of an LLM. If you're just looking for sculpting context, that would be #codebase. You got it? Now, how do you know what the index is? First of all, in VS Code, if you come down to the status bar and you hover over the GitHub Copilot icon, this will let you know whether you're indexed. It looks like I'm not indexed yet, so I'm going to fix that by opening up the command palette, and I'm going to look up workspace index. Notice here that we've got build local workspace index, build remote. Whether you want to keep it local and or remote in GitHub is up to you. Now, once you push into GitHub, it's a foregone conclusion that GitHub is going to build a remote index. But especially if you're not yet in GitHub, this is a big insight that I've had just recently, that you don't have to have published to GitHub. We can build a local workspace index as well. And after issuing that command, when I hover over the GitHub icon, notice that I have workspace index locally indexed. And this click out is actually pretty important. It'll take you out to the GitHub Copilot docs in VS Code where it talks about indexing. Let me actually go up to the top of the article. Make chat an expert in your workspace is the name of the specific article. And if you really want to geek out on the details, at least on Windows, the path that you're interested in is, let me reveal it here, user profile, app data, roaming code, user, workspace storage. And I've done an inverse sort on date modified, and this is what the index actually looks at. I'll leave it as here. You've got a workspace JSON and a bunch of database files. That might be too much info for you. You don't care. Let me bring this up and let me do workspace index and let me build a remote index as well. Whoops, it looks like I got a warning there. Could not build a remote workspace index. No Git repos found. That's right. Well, this particular repository I haven't initialized for Git yet, so hopefully it makes sense. You'll at least need to have a Git repo set before you can do that. I guess I could fix that easily enough. Let me pop open a terminal and do a git init. I ran the command again, and this time it said could not build remote workspace index, no remotely indexable repos found. Okay, so let me summarize what I just learned and I want to pass on with you. Looks like for local workspace index, it's local only, fully understandable. In order to have a GitHub-based workspace index, you're going to not only need a Git repo, but you'll also need to push into the GitHub cloud so that you've registered the repo in GitHub Cloud. cloud, which again, that makes total sense, but I'm glad to elucidate it further for you here in this little tutorial. Let me finish with a flourish here by giving a demo of each of those techniques. I'm going to start with pound codebase, and I'm going to say, do I have any unit testing going on in this repo yet? And we're going to see here that it searched the codebase and it ran through an enumeration of different testing frameworks based on the language evidently that I'm using in this codebase. And this response came to us from the GitHub Copilot off-the-shelf LLM. If we wanted to add an additional reasoning layer, we could send a request into @Workspace and say, what testing framework is in use here? If not, what do you recommend? You see? So in this case, we're bringing in not only the context clue, but we're bringing in additional reasoning as well. And notice again, it's important for us to know who we're chatting with always when we're using a generative AI product. We can hover over and we can see that this completion has come from the Workspace chat participant, which again is contributed from the Copilot chat extension and represents a nested HTTP request to a separate LLM that GitHub hosts that's smart on GitHub API and also can access the Workspace index. Well, alrighty, there you have it. I hope that this brief lesson increased your mastery of GitHub Copilot in VS Code. Thanks for stopping by. I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.